Welcome to the Prime Venture Partners podcast. Today, I am delighted to have with us a very special guest as we come towards the end of 2021, Alisa Cohn. She's been rated as one of the top startup coaches in the world, actually number one. She is also an author. She's recently published a book, which we'll talk about, From Startup to Grown Up. And she has mentored and coached so many startup CEOs, founders, all the way to CEOs of large publicly traded companies and even some larger Fortune 500 type companies. So welcome to the show, Alisa.
Thanks, Amit. It's so wonderful to be here with you.
Yes, thanks. Thanks so much for taking the time. I've skimmed through your book. I can't say I've read all of it, but it is just really a fascinating kind of read. And I'll pick one thing right away from the book, like a little excerpt, which is fascinating, which says, one CEO once told you, it's eerie how the company looks more and more like me. Sometimes I have trouble delivering difficult news and sometimes I'm indecisive. And then I watch people in the company having difficulty doing both of those things, meaning delivering difficult news and being indecisive. So if you haven't done any self-reflection, you're just going to, the company's going to look like you. So maybe we can use that as a segue to getting started about how do you as a founder just come to terms of how you are doing and how do you need to do better.
Yeah, it's thank you for bringing that up. I'm sort of smiling because I'm like, yes, it's so true. It is so true. The thing is that no matter what, you as an entrepreneur and really as any leader, you're not always aware of how much the company and everyone around you mimics you and knows what you're doing. When you're the founder of an early stage company in particular, it's you and your co-founder, it's you and 8 people. Maybe you've already known them from, college or whatnot, or from other experiences. But, over time, when you're successful, you turn to 20 people, 50 people, 100 people, and 1,000 people. And those little things that you're not aware of, the quirks that make up you, your personality, mirror themselves. They get kind of copied throughout the company. And then all the things that you're great at and all the ways that you're amazing are copied, and all the issues that you have and all the, little quirks and difficulties that you have as your personality, they also get copied. So the best thing anyone can do is to step back and do that self-reflection to really see, what am I want to put out there, and to be the master of yourself, to put out the right personality, behaviors, so that people will copy the right behaviors.
Absolutely. And sometimes they may even be blind spots. So you're not even aware that you're doing that. One of the first times I became a quote unquote senior manager, a manager of managers, one of my bosses told me that once you're in a leadership position, and this is even more pronounced for a startup founder, even a little whisper becomes a loud scream, because you might have just said something in passing. So how do you figure out what image are you projecting or what values are you projecting? Any thoughts on that?
Yes, actually, I'll give you a little story that's also in my book. There's a CEO I work with, and after they had a holiday party down the street, a restaurant down the street. And afterwards, she said, kind of by the by, oh, that was so convenient. Any more convenient would have to be in the parking lot. And then little did she know, the next summer, people said, do you want a tent in the parking lot for the holiday party? And she said, what? What are you talking about? Well, they took it as like that was a mandate from her, a directive to move the holiday party to the parking lot. When you're a leader, to your point, a senior leader, certainly a CEO, your suggestions are orders. Your whispers are orders. Your brainstorms and your thought process are orders. And by the way, also your orders are orders. So the truth is that is happening around you. And the way to uproot your blind spots really is to get feedback from others. So I do, of course, a 360 feedback process for my clients to help them see their blind spots. And also, if you don't have a coach, you can also ask people around you, what are some of the things that I'm not seeing? And if you can really convince them that you're interested and listen to what they have to say and not get defensive, you will quickly unearth your own blind spots.
Yeah, I'd like to dig into both of those, because I think those are both fantastic kind of tools and systems as they were. So the 360, how do you run an effective 360? In fact, I think it's probably one of the most underutilized tools probably in all of corporate life, and certainly in startups, because you're like, oh, that's for the corporate people, right? We don't do 360s. We know what's going on.
Right. Totally. The other thing in the corporate world, it can often be, used as a weapon. And so then it gets a bad name, like, oh, I did a 360 and then I didn't get a raise or I didn't get promoted or whatever. That's not very good. So when I think about 360, I think about this. You are the expert on your intention. Everybody around you is the expert on your impact. Leadership growth and effective leadership has to do with you marrying intention with impact. And the way to get at that is to talk to the experts who are the consumers of your leadership. Who are the folks who are impacted by your leadership, the people around you. And if you ask them, or I, usually as a coach, I ask them, what do you think, what are this person's strongest strengths? What are their development opportunities, weaknesses, obstacles, and blind spots? How do they influence? What environments bring out their best and their worst? And ultimately, what specific behavioral suggestions do you have for this person to help them be a better leader, a better CEO? And so if you get a lot of people weighing in on that, believe me, you're going to get a roadmap for yourself about some areas that you could make some changes in.
I love that, marrying intention to impact and then asking your customers or your, stakeholders as they were about how you're doing. Why is it so underutilized, do you think, in the startup world? Number one, the 360 in general, right? And then secondly, I love the point you made, and I'd like you to expand on that. What are the behavioral insights or suggestions that you would recommend, as opposed to what are they good at, what could they do better in, which is fairly typical?
Right. Well, the first question is, I think that these things are not, 360 and other tools are not always implemented. Number one, because we're all busy building the business, busy putting out fires, hard to take the time. Number two, I think especially first-time founders don't understand how important it is for them to get on top of their own self-development, for them to understand how they're coming across and how much their leadership is so important to the stewardship of the business. So I think it's lack of time and lack of understanding of the emphasis on it. But I'll tell you one great example that came out of 360 feedback that I think will answer your second question. I worked with this founder. His name was Lou, and Lou's fantastic, evolved and charismatic and caring and all these things. So I asked, the folks around him, what are his development opportunities? One, strengths and development opportunities. And one person said, he's arrogant. I was like, arrogant? I didn't say this, but I thought, wait, this is the nicest guy in the world. Like, wow, what is it you're seeing? So I did not say that. I'm a coach. So I said, oh, tell me more. What do you mean arrogant? And she said, well, he's just so arrogant all the time, when he calls us into meetings or whatever. And, you got to really probe. Okay, tell me what behavior specifically he does that makes you say he's arrogant. And she said, he interrupts me all the time. Ah, he's an interrupter. So I go back to Lou and I say, hey, somebody here said you were arrogant. I'm not arrogant. I know. But somebody said that you interrupt people. I don't interrupt people. We talked for another minute, and within 20 seconds, he interrupted me 3 times, right? Just in that, right? And I had never noticed it, by the way, because that's another important, distinction here. I'm the coach. My job is to get you to talk. If you interrupt me, that's good. But if you interrupt your people, that's bad, right? So he needed to really work on the behavioral element of interrupting, which was being read by other people as arrogant.
Great. Let me jump to a slightly different topic. As you coach so many people, right, and startup founders to later stage CEOs, what are some of your favorite questions you ask to get and I know it'll depend on the context and what you're coaching them for, but are there like a sort of a working set of questions that you normally get into with them?
Well, that's such a good question. I work with one client, and I have now kind of trained them that I'm not going to answer the question initially, as in, Alisa, what should we do? And they know, and they make fun of me and mimic me that I'm going to say, what do you think you should do? And that's not to be a jerk. And that's also not to minimize my own expertise. Having been a coach for 20 years, I've seen a lot of things. But people instinctively go to, oh, I don't know what to do. And so one of my favorite questions is, what would you do if you did know what to do? Because that requires you to pause and to really think. Because at the end of the day, and this is true for all founders and for all leaders and really all people, if I weren't here, you do something. And, you might ignore it. Okay, fine. If I weren't here, what would you do? You might ignore it. Okay. But it's very helpful. I think that to your point about questions are very powerful. Other questions I have are, what does success look like? What would be so problematic if you failed? What's the worst case scenario here? What's keeping you in the way? What's in your way of what's keeping you from taking action? Also, one question I really like is, what are you pretending not to know? Like if someone's dealing with a pattern of behavior over and over again, thinking it's going to change, it's not going to change. I'm like wondering, what are you pretending not to know?
I just love that last question. And I also know you sort of work with board members, and you have also got a chapter in the book on how to run effective boards. What is sometimes the board's role in helping the CEO and the founding team grow? And what is it that the board, pretends to not know, but they know?
I love that. That is so true. I mean, we could write a whole other book on boards. There are some super functional boards and who will work well together and do a great job for the entrepreneur. And there are some venture investors and board members who I know personally who are fantastic and so helpful to the CEOs I work with and the founders I work with. And then there's everybody else. And I think that it's a good question. What are board members pretending not to know sometimes? I have this part in the book where I talk about one board member who is like the general fighting the last war. And I regularly think that, somebody will come in with something that happened yesterday or 2 weeks ago with one of their other companies, and it either went well or went badly. And they're taking that baggage and very vehemently, kind of throwing it onto this founder, right? Even though it's like a very different experience. Sometimes as a founder, you've got to your job is to figure out how to slice and dice the advice you're getting, sometimes good and sometimes should be ignored. And the other thing I would say is one example of that is I worked with a set of co-founders, and they were inexperienced, and the investor, the VC who was on their board, was pretty inexperienced, and he would make them go on fact-finding mission. They were doing frontier technology, and he wanted them to have the predictable, cadence of the business. And they would go on fact-finding missions all the time. And it was such a waste of time, And frankly, money, because then they had to go off and do all these other things and get other outside consultants. And it was really not the right thing for the right stage. So I think as founders, and certainly as any CEO, I know you know this, but recognize you're really the one who knows what's going on around here. You're really the one who's running this business. People can give you advice, but they don't really know what's going on inside your company. So your job is to kind of separate out what's valuable and what's not valuable.
Great. So let me take a specific question. When does the founder or set of founders know that they are ready for coaching? And likewise with the boards, right? Sometimes you as the board member observe, or the board observes that, look, they're doing great, the metrics are fine, but the company is scaling quite fast, and maybe they're not going to, cut it in certain ways, or they need to up level themselves. So when is a good time to get that going? And when do you become self-aware that, hey, I want it? Because you obviously can't, shove it down somebody's throat, or you read the great book from Alisa, or
right.
A book about Bill Campbell, and you're like, oh, now I want to get a coach, because it seems like that's the thing to do.
Right. Well, that does happen, actually. That definitely happens. Listen, my book is called From Startup to Grown Up, and it's divided into 3 sections: managing you, managing them, and managing the company. And at some point, early or late, something's going to happen that's going to be problematic, right? Whether it's like, oh, we're missing our numbers, we can't hit our forecasts, we don't know, we don't understand kind of what the state of the projects is. That's managing the company. That's a real problem. Maybe you need to have a coach to kind of help you sort out what is the problem in the way you're running the company that's giving rise to that issue, or managing them. You always have people problems. Most founders I work with at some point have a lot of trouble, or early on have a lot of trouble giving productive, difficult feedback. I don't mean saying you suck, right? Sometimes the founders I work with can be overly aggressive. I don't suggest that you ever say that. However, you want to be productive and helpful in trying to get this person to change. And people have a lot of trouble delivering difficult messages or figuring out how to manage their team so that they go in the right direction. That's a good moment to get a coach. And then certainly if you're having imposter syndrome, if you're having, not knowing how to handle the ups and downs, you kind of realize your style isn't working, you want to grow as a leader, that's also a great time to hire a coach and to look for a coach. And I guess the last thing I would say is that some founders come to me and say, I'm a first-time founder, I don't know what I don't know. And I recognize that it's going to be helpful to have partnership on this journey.
Absolutely great. Maybe you talk a little bit about imposter syndrome. I think all of us have it at some level, but nonetheless, in the context of founders, because you've dealt with so many at different scales, does it eventually go away or does it not? And if you have it, any tips and tricks, right, to kind of deal with it?
I talked to an extremely successful founder who'd grown a big companies and now became an investor. And he said, I used to have imposter syndrome and now I have worse imposter syndrome because the stakes are higher. And so imposter syndrome doesn't go away. I would say famously, Serena Williams has imposter syndrome. Many famous people and, sort of accomplished people have imposter syndrome. So then what do you do about it? That's the question. My best tool for everybody is to create a highlight reel. And a highlight reel is for you to actually physically write down your past accomplishments, your past successes, to remind you of, your capabilities. And when you have that as a document, like seriously a document, you can read it every day. You can read it before you do hard things. It gives you a fighting chance to remind yourself of your capabilities and your capacity, even in the face of severe self-doubt or imposter syndrome.
That's a wonderful tool. I sort of almost was reminding me of journaling, which is one of the things you talk about. And maybe sort of, I'm going a little bit all over, but I'm loving the conversation here. Are there things you recommend, journaling for in terms of just the business and getting better as a leader, as a CEO, as a founder, and so forth?
Yeah, journaling is really, really effective. First of all, journaling helps you get out of your own head and write down your thoughts. So very often we get almost like paralyzed by all the concerns and all the doubts and all the context and all the things going on. When you write them down in a journal to sort of share your feelings to yourself and to give rise to them, they become more easy to manage. They become less kind of hidden secrets and all jumbled up in your head, and they become on the paper. So it helps you unpack them. The other thing is that it's helpful for you to journal on the things which are, patterns like, oh, this always happens to me every day at 3:00. Maybe I should eat lunch, right? Or, this always happens when I deal with this particular person. I once worked with an entrepreneur, a founder, and he had a lot of issues with his CTO. And he kept telling me it was okay. Oh, it's okay. It's okay. This guy would be disruptive. This guy would, he would be constantly pushing him to make changes or whatever. And I kept saying, I think you really should have a conversation. No, it's okay. It's okay. And then at some point, the CEO said to me, I asked about the leadership team. And he said, I've stopped having the leadership team. I was like, what do you mean you stopped having the leadership team meeting? Like, what are you talking about? He said, oh, we didn't have time. I said, I don't think that's really the right answer. He said, I can no longer stand being in the room with the CTO. Okay, now that is significant, right? That's important. So what that really means is if you kind of journal and tell yourself the truth, it helps you tell yourself the truth. Then you can make productive choices in the face of that truth.
Yes, fascinating. Let me switch gears. There's a lovely quote. It's not from your book, but one that I've always sort of enjoyed, so it says, when the rate of pace of change outside is greater than the rate of pace of change inside, whether it's in your company or yourself, something's going to give, right? So you need to sort of keep pace. And, while many founders go on to be great CEOs of even large publicly traded companies and so forth, many others say, hey, look, this is not for me, right? I mean, famously, Reid Hoffman, went and found somebody else. And there's so many examples. Larry and Sergey, I worked at Google for many years, found Eric Schmidt and so forth. So when is the right time to know, both for one founder, as well as sometimes it's awkward that if it's like 2 or 3 person founding team, maybe one person is scaling, but 2 others are not, or 2 are scaling, but 1 isn't. So when is the right time to kind of, how do you do that assessment? How do you know that it's not just a coaching or a skill gap, but like you really need to get some other people here going forward?
I know that is a very deep question. I love your quote. There's a few things here. I'm going to address the topic just of the founders, because it is a thing that happens where you've got a couple of, two or more co-founders. Usually it's the CEO who is scaling. Oh, that's not always true. And the other co-founder may not be scaling. And I think it starts with the right co-founder relationship, where actually you talk about those things in advance. In my book, From Startup to Grown Up, I have what's called the co-founder prenup that I've kind of, decided is a thing. And what I ask co-founders to do, no matter where they are in their journey as co-founders, is actually to ask themselves, each other, these questions. How do we handle conflict? What are our values? How do we see this business? And also, what's going to happen if one of us is not scaling? So just being able to give rise to those conversations in advance and throughout their journey together, that's super helpful. But it also requires both co-founders to build their communication skills and build their relationships. So when the going gets tough, they can have the difficult conversations with each other. That is super, super critical. And then you can really have an honest conversation about what it is to not be scaling. By the way, there's no shame in that. It really is about maybe this isn't, maybe we all have our basket of strengths and skills. So there's one co-founder who I know who moved away from being so-called, CTO, back to programmer. It was like, that's what I always wanted to do. That's what I was always great at. And there's nothing wrong with that. Now, when the CEO either decides or, can decide, to your point about Reid Hoffman, that they want to step away and then find the right new CEO, that's fantastic. The issue is when the board or others, even the employees and executives, need something more from him or her, and they're not delivering it. That is very painful. And I think it takes a lot of nuanced discussions with trusted advisors to bring them along to the fact that they can be super successful without having to still be the CEO.
Absolutely. It does take a lot of emotional maturity, and it is obviously your baby, and we've kind of built it to this point. So it's going to be very, very hard to kind of think about that, but it might be for the greater good, because the company could go on and do amazing things.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about not just the founders, but building the organization and what it takes to build a great org. And again, I'll read a quote an excerpt from the book. It says, at some point, you're going to have to create a structure to get all these folks to work together, right? So, and there's interesting kind of mnemonics like squads, tribes, guilds from Spotify, and pods from HubSpot, and so forth. And obviously, founders are very reticent, and especially the kind of founders we deal with at the early stage, where you're going from 0 to 1, 1 to 10, 10 to maybe 100. They're like, no, we all hang together and everybody interviews everybody, and this is like one nice happy family, right? And you're like, no, that's not going to scale after maybe even 50 people, right? So how do you think about just designing the org, building the org, and any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it's really important for you as the founder CEO to realize at some point you're going to have to scale. Whatever you want, you can experiment with decentralized leadership. You can experiment with holacracy, matrix, whatever you want to do. And it's super important for you to recognize that at some point you can't have all 50 people in the room making decisions. So getting your mind around that early is super important. The second is that I think this is where the unsung hero comes in of management. You need to bring managers in. Employees want a home. They want to feel cared for. They want to feel seen. They want to feel understood. And that the person that does that is not necessarily you as you get to be bigger, not even quote unquote the company, it is the manager. So bringing in strong managers, training your managers, investing in your managers helps any kind of structure you want to create, because it helps employees understand what's going on and feel they have a communication channel to deliver feedback, and ultimately to feel seen and valued for their contribution.
Yes. And one of the things that comes with that, it's a very interesting point that you make about management being unsung heroes, especially in a startup or a more new age company context, is also you need to know how to let go and how to delegate effectively. I think a lot of founders struggle with that because they're so good and so passionate about what they do. And of course, you talk a lot about this, and I know you coach on this as well. So any thoughts on how to delegate effectively as you're building the management team and the leadership team and the company?
Yeah, it's very difficult. It's certainly difficult for founders to delegate away their baby. They could delegate the stuff they don't like, but like delegating their baby is actually very difficult. Maybe it's the product, right?
Yes.
Maybe it's even, if they're financially oriented, it's the finances. But at some point, you're going to have to delegate. So when I think about this, I think about it in sort of a few steps. Number one, recognize you have to delegate. Number two, make a list of all the things that you could delegate and figure out who you're going to give them to. Number three, really assess, that person, the person you're going to give the task to. Are they going to be great at this? Do they already know how to do it? Or are they kind of new at it? That's going to help you determine how much context you need to give them and how much supervision. I think a lot of managers will say, I'm not a micromanager, but if you're giving something to a junior person, you've got to check in and supervise quite closely, right? It's not about you, it's about them and what they need. And then the last step I would say is that people forget to really acknowledge, what does done look like? Like, let's look at each other and agree when this is complete, we'll both know it because it will be done. And done means this, 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 and this, right? A descriptor of what done is. And done includes a deadline. Just recently, someone said to me, the CEO said to me, I didn't get the thing and I keep asking for it and I haven't gotten it. I said, well, did she give you it? Like, did you give her a deadline? And he said, no, like she should have just known. People don't know. People do not know. Give a deadline. And then you can have something to grade against. Like, well, hang on, I gave a deadline, you didn't make the deadline. That's a conversation to have. This feeling of like, I thought you were going to get it to me. That's a very difficult conversation to have.
Yes, indeed. I also found this very cute kind of quote / excerpt from the book, which says, kind of, there are many ways to motivate people, but there's one very trivial way, and I'll let you say it, that requires no special equipment, doesn't cost anything, and people don't do it. Do you want to talk about what that secret weapon is, or the open secret is?
Yes. That is praise. That is positive feedback. People do not do that enough, and I do not know why. And I think it's uncomfortable because people feel like it's like, first of all, if you didn't grow up in a house which gave a lot of praise, and if you didn't grow up in a work environment which gave a lot of praise, I get that you're uncomfortable doing it. Also, it's this feeling of, it's like the workplace version of I love you. And that's uncomfortable for a lot of people who aren't used to it.
And what about this? So I completely agree with you. I couldn't agree with you more. That this feeling like, hey, look, if that's all we do, how do we do so-called radical candor, right? How do we give them more critical feedback that's not all fine and dandy and everything is great? Because
no, I think that's a great question. But the problem is that when you just give this so-called radical candor, which I have something to say about, right, then you don't, people aren't happy, right? It's like people sort of weaponize this idea of radical candor in terms of like, well, I had to tell him that he was a jerk or whatever. So first of all, Radical Candor is a fantastic book. It's by Kim Scott, and everyone should go out and buy it for sure. And she has a grid about, sort of the way to think about so-called candor. And the truth is that her first step, and the first step with any kind of feedback you want to give or relationship you want to build, is to build that relationship, to care about this person, to give them positive feedback, to showcase what they're doing well. Then, and only then, have you earned the right to also help them grow their career and develop their career by giving them the more difficult, the more constructive feedback. Because otherwise, by the way, on the other side of that, and I worked with a CFO when I had this conversation with him. He was averse to giving feedback to his employee because he was, she's going to cry and it's going to be upsetting and she's not going to want to hear it. So to me, what I said to him was, you're being very stingy because you see ways that she can improve and needs to improve and, could be more successful. And you're not giving her that feedback because you're uncomfortable, right? Because you're uncomfortable. So the essence, and by the way, he did go give her the feedback and she did cry and she did get upset. And the next day she came to him and said, I know that was hard feedback to give. Thank you for giving me that feedback. I wish someone had given me that feedback 15 years ago. So she's been running around for 15 years wishing, that she could be more successful. And so nobody was ever generous enough to give her that feedback. So that's the way I see all the topics of feedback. But the step one is to build a relationship and make sure that people know what they're doing right. And then make sure they understand that when you give them critical feedback, it's to help them get better, not make them feel bad.
Absolutely. And I also love the point about defining kind of what done is done means, right? And what are the constraints or the guardrails or timelines around it. And not just like, judge other people, by their actions, and myself by my intent, right? So that kind of thing.
Yes.
So
Right. Exactly.
I just sort of quickly crowdsourced a couple of questions on Twitter and LinkedIn, and one came in that is really interesting. So it may not tie with the rest of the conversation here, but I wanted to bring it up, which is, what are some of the best ways to keep surfacing and reminding, how everybody's job contributes to the larger purpose of the startup? And more broadly, I'll expand it to, how do you kind of build culture more consciously and proactively?
Right. So again, it comes back to starting with intention, right? To intend to build culture and to intend to have sort of an operating system inside of the company of the way we do things around here. So having that defined for yourself, bringing your employees into that, and then talking about it and showcasing and rewarding those cultural elements. And over time, really comes down to communication. It's you communicating to your executives. It's your executives communicating to their leaders and managers. It's the leaders and managers communicating to the employee what we expect around here, what the standard is, when to do, when a more than ordinary is expected. And then again, the sort of the way we do things. So the more you highlight that and communicate about that and reward for the behaviors you're looking for, the more it'll be a comprehensive and cohesive, both, I guess I would say culture, but also operating system of the company.
Wonderful. One other question that I had in my mind is, how do you practice self-care and self-love, because it's such a tough journey, right? I think you in your own podcast, which you run as well, talk about the hero's journey, and we often tell our founders that out of the 365 days, 360 days are sort of like bumpy, and there's like a few days of glory if things are going well, right? So how do you not, just like the highlights reel thing that you talked about, which I loved, to tackle imposter syndrome, are there other things that you recommend to just sort of keep mentally and emotionally healthy as you go through this really tough journey of?
Yes, so true. And you're so right that like most days are really awful and there's only a few days of real glory. Not only that, but as you know, founders will even say to me, I knew it would be ups and downs, but I didn't realize it'd be ups and downs like in the same minute, right? Like in the same exact, like close to each other. And that is the way it is. So it's very emotional and it's a long term, and you don't always know if you're making progress. And so the way I would say about that is sit down and recognize you got to pace yourself for the marathon. They call it a marathon, not a sprint, because it's a marathon, not a sprint. So you've got to make sure you pace yourself, that you can find time to take some time off, and that you really make sure that that's important, that I think that people don't do enough of basic practices like getting enough sleep, like eating right, having the right nutrition, like working out on a regular basis to help you with stress release, finding other stress relief things, finding a group of people around you that can relate to what you're talking about, like other CEOs, also having friends around you to remind you of the rest of your life. All of those tools help you stay in it for the long term.
Absolutely. I think, sleep, exercise, meditation, nutrition,
Yes.
These are all very basic low-hanging fruit that can be done, and that can sort of yield great rewards. You write a lot, right? You write for the Wall Street Journal, you write for Forbes, you've of course got a book, from startup to grown up. What do you read? What are things that you read?
What do I read? Well, I read a lot of, sort of business books. Certainly, I have a book right here called The Long Game by my good friend Dory Clark, and I have been reading that. I've read, I'm looking right now at my bookshelf. My friend Michael Bungay Stanier just wrote a book called How to Begin. I was also inspired by Ben Horowitz's, like many people, The Hard Thing About Hard Things. Candidly, when I first read it, I was like, oh, give me a break. This is like so too much. However, all my founders loved it. It's like, okay. So I read it again. Actually, listening to it was helpful. And what I like about the book is that it really showcases the ups and downs and the real talk of what it means to be an entrepreneur growing into a CEO. And I thought it was a little too much sort of Ben Horowitz and my experience. And I wanted to write a book that was more broad from the point of view of showcasing a number of different experiences, because there's a lot of ways and a lot of things you go through when you're a founder.
Absolutely. Are there other books that you recommend your founders read? Of course, I just saw the recommendation for The Long Game, and I've just purchased it just before the podcast today.
Oh, good.
Yeah. But are there other books or typical ones that you recommend as people go through their sort of growth journey here?
Yes, I think that Radical Candor is a great book. I also think that Crucial Conversations is a great book. Certainly my mentor's book, What Got You Here Won't Get You There, is a fantastic book. Also, I encourage people to read, kind of more spiritual literature, like whatever practice you might have, like you might have a Buddhist practice, or I guess I would say perspective taking about, kind of how life really is, and how, when you feel the walls coming in on you, having some perspective. So there are podcasts also I really enjoy, like Tara Brach's podcast, which is a lot of Buddhist wisdom.
Absolutely. Alisa, we could go on and on, but I really want to be respectful of your time. It has just been a delight speaking to you. And I hope that the founders that do tune in and listen to this podcast, gives them some food for thought, for self-reflection as they kind of wind up the year and get charged up for 2022. So really appreciate you taking the time to be on the Prime Venture Partners podcast.
Well, it was my pleasure. And thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Thanks.
Dear listeners, thank you for listening to this episode of the podcast. Subscribe now on your favorite podcast app for free, and you'll be the first one to know when new episodes are available. Just search for Prime Venture Partners podcast in Apple Podcast, Spotify, Castbox, or however you get your podcasts. Then hit subscribe. And if you have enjoyed the show, we would be really grateful if you leave us a review on Apple Podcast. To read the full transcript, find the link in the show notes.